Welcome to this latest edition of our Tech Law video series. We're here today to talk about our tech index, the latest tech index, which, as you know, we've been running for over a decade. This year it's a little bit special. We've gone out to far more organisations, 1,200 organisations around the world. So we have truly global results to talk about. There's a lot coming out in the tech index this year, and to remind you, as usual, we look at 5G, we look at AI, we look at IoT, but we also look at the adequacy of the regulatory regimes, IP, availability of talent, funds, tech M&A, and so forth. So we've got a truly global set of results that we can compare and talk about. And I'm delighted today to be joined by two colleagues, Chloe Forster and Paul Allen, and we're going to take a bit of a deeper dive into and around the whole topic of digital transformation. Now, guys, when I was looking at the report, there's a lot coming out here. There's a real wash of AI through the report. 63% say that AI is the frontier for growth, but at the same time, we're seeing a sort of last mile problem for adoption. ESG comes in large as well. 50% saying that ESG is a priority, and yet 3/4 of organizations don't have a comprehensive ESG framework, and so forth. So let's hone in a little bit to digital transformation, because that is the way in which organizations keep relevant and move forward. Paul used to coin a phrase, and probably still do, that organizations need to digitize or they will die. Is that still the case? Are you seeing that from the results?
Yeah, I think that if there's something in your business model that can be digitized, and you aren't the one that's looking at digitizing it and digitalizing that part of your business model, chances are your competitor will. Right. And if your competitor then starts to digitalize their business model, they're going to gain a competitive advantage over you, and ultimately that's going to lead to a loss of market position. Now, how do we know that's true? We know it's true because we've seen it play out for the last 10 to 20 years. We've seen it play out in the retail space. We've seen it play out in the entertainment space. We've seen it play out, time and time again, including in financial services and so on. So to say digitize or die is obviously a little bit black and white, but if you're not on the journey of digital transformation, then in all likelihood you're going to be losing your competitive advantage, and that's not a good thing. So you have to embrace this as an organisation.
And Chloe, from your perspective, are you seeing similar?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. But what I think is quite interesting from the report is actually the improvement in business sentiment around tech, and the positivity, which is actually quite interesting given the geopolitical environment. And I think businesses are feeling positive about this because they see the opportunities, particularly since the advent of Gen AI and the boom that's come as a result of that. And so rather than digitize or die, it's actually, what can we get? How can we improve our business? How can we stay nimble? And there's just a subtle, I think, narrative shift in terms of how businesses are viewing this.
And staying nimble, as you say, it's less sort of transform, as in throw away the old model to the new, but more evolve. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've already seen the first wave of digital transformation for many businesses, and so now it's almost less overwhelming. It's more of a case of those incremental improvements, what technologies can I add to the stack, to the business, to do things better, to allow us to really capitalize on the data that we have, for example. And so it's more of an evolutionary journey rather than a revolution.
Absolutely.
And you've seen the first wave, as you're talking about now, Chloe. You're based in London. Paul, you're based in the Middle East. To what extent is that sort of first wave, second wave reflected in what you're seeing in the Middle East?
In the Middle East, I think it's definitely embracing this digital evolution journey. I mean, there's no doubt about that. There's an incredible amount of interest and excitement and investment that's being made by government and private organisations in their digital journey. And the cloud transformation piece has absolutely been now embraced, but in a different way compared to some other parts of the world. So we have a lot more cloud services that are available through onshore offerings that allow for data sovereignty, for example, whereas that's not as important in some other jurisdictions. So it's definitely being embraced, but it's in a nuanced and different way that's very adapted to the local market. I think one of the things that was most interesting about the report was looking at where the opportunities are for growth. And if you look at the top 4 areas that are in the report, we see AI at the top. Then we've got 5G.
Yeah.
Then we've got digital transformation, which is a bit like an umbrella term for everything. And then finally, we have the cybersecurity piece.
Yeah.
But from a Middle East perspective, and we're probably thinking here really the UAE and Saudi Arabia and Qatar and the Gulf states more than anything, but from a Middle East perspective, actually the 2 that stand out, the ones where the biggest opportunities aren't AI and aren't digital transformation itself, it's in 5G and in cybersecurity. And I thought that was really interesting, particularly on the 5G side of things. And it tells us that in the Middle East, there has been an incredible amount of investment going into the network, going into having these high-speed capabilities, into the digital infrastructure, including in terms of data centers. And we've seen some recent announcements about the level of investment that's going in from some of the big tech titans into Saudi Arabia and into the UAE. And so now the region is really poised for use cases to come through on the 5G side. Things like telemedicine, things like autonomous vehicles, things like smart city applications, et cetera, et cetera. So that's really interesting. And one of the things that I think is particularly cool about this report is that if you're the business and you look at this report, then you can very, very quickly get this macro sense of what's going on in the world. But you can also then drill down into region by region and think, okay, well, how is this impacting on my region? And if you're the legal side of the business, then you can think, oh, well, how is my business going to be responding to this? And then lining yourself up to support it, lining yourself up. So there's so much value in this report to help you as a business to shape your positioning, but also as a legal team to then think about, well, what might my business be wanting to do coming up, and then position yourself for that.
Yeah, there's a sense in which you can almost travel the world through the report. And to your point, getting those sort of local differences. You talk about UAE. I'm thinking of visiting you in Dubai and just thinking how you're not encumbered by hundreds of years of infrastructure and bendy roads and so forth. So you can really embrace electric vehicles, for example, autonomous vehicles in a much better way. Okay, so fine. So we've made the point. Obviously, there's a lot in the report to look at as regional differences and to compare and contrast. But let's bring it back, as you said, umbrella term, digital transformation. Just the evolutionary sense of organisations staying nimble, as you said, Chloe, and think about how that actually happens. What are the success factors? And part of what the report looks at is leadership and the boards and so forth. And the questions seems to be arising or comes through as a thread in the report as to whether or not organisations have the right makeup at the board level to push this through. Is that something you're seeing in your daily work, Chloe?
Yeah, it's a great question, Mark, because I think at the moment there is a risk, particularly with AI, of businesses sort of reaching a state of almost inertia. Paul, you talked about it. The term that I really enjoyed in the report was businesses are experiencing FOMO. They want to make sure that they are keeping step with their competitors, but at the same time they're nervous of backing the Betamax of the modern world and investing in a technology which ultimately isn't going to deliver the returns long term. And so balancing that against a geopolitical environment and the regulatory shifting landscape is a challenging one. And for boards to be able to navigate that, they have to understand the technology, they have to understand the investments decisions that they're making. And so I think we will see an increase in the prominence of CTOs and CIOs to make sure that that knowledge is there at board level. But ultimately as well, I think boards and leaderships in businesses need to make sure that they understand the technology and to make sure that they really are buying into and embracing and leading with the agility, the nimble approach that businesses need to fully embrace in order to be digitally native.
So that's a factor, isn't it? Just having the right team, the right makeup, the right C-suite. But I think all of us are converts. The opportunities of digital transformation are apparent, aren't they? Whether it's flexibility, streamlined processes, cost reduction, and so forth. Let's flip it for a second and just the report talks about the challenges, the drawbacks. What's your perspective on the key challenges for any organisation seeking to transform in some way? Paul, maybe from the Middle East perspective.
I mean, there are a number of different challenges. I don't think they're unique to the Middle East or anywhere. Whenever people talk about introducing new technologies or making changes to their business model that rely on technology, let's put it that way, because it's not really about the technology, is it? It's about finding new ways of doing things, innovative ways of doing things that create value, and technology is the enabler of that. And there's risks associated with that. But what are some of the challenges? One of the challenges is definitely culture. You know, the organizational culture itself needs to be one that has embraced this and sees this as something that's going to create value, and isn't looking at this from a fear lens, but rather from that value creation lens. And then once you sort of know what you want, you can get it, right? So if the organization knows that that's what they want to do, then they have to have that culture in place that will allow them to fully embrace that.
These are really human factors, aren't they?
Absolutely.
What's the target we're trying to hit?
You know, it's not a technology problem. These are all human problems, because technology is a creation of us as people. So it's culture, and then I would also say that none of this is a nut that you can crack by yourself. You know, you have to partner. It's not possible to try and do all of this within your own sort of four walls. There's going to have to be partnering, right? And obviously that's where the contracting piece comes in. And then how do you create win-win partnering arrangements that allow you to create that value in a trusted way where both parties are getting something out of it over the longer term. So you have to have that partnering arrangement in there. The other thing that I thought was really interesting about the report is there wasn't a lot of emphasis on acquisitions. There was a percentage, but it was outweighed by other thoughts around what should be done in order to create this value. And the acquisition piece was rather low down on the list. And I think that's another mindset piece. You know, the mindset piece needs to embrace this idea that we can't do it all by ourselves. So if we can't partner, maybe we actually do need to do that acquisition. And if you look at the growth trajectory of some of the tech titans, you will see that it's acquisition after acquisition after acquisition after acquisition after acquisition. And that's what's allowed them to get ahead of the market. Obviously, you've got to do that in a way that creates synergies, and you're not just buying stuff for the sake of it. But you know, that's not featuring as heavily, and I was curious as to why that might be, because there's a lot of capital out there.
Yes.
It's not that we don't have debt that's, you know, we don't have cheap debt like we used to, but it's still not expensive debt. So I just thought that was quite interesting.
Which is a comment that our colleague Joel Cox in Melbourne makes. He's a corporate lawyer, as you know. He talks about acqui-hire, acquiring to hire in the talent, and you can make a kind of leapfrog forward, can't you, in your position in the market. Chloe, coming back to you, just you think about digital transformation. There was, talking of leapfrogging, there was almost like a pole vaulting forward out of COVID. COVID in technology and technology leaping forward was one of the key factors we saw, whether it's just the prevalence of Zoom and Teams or more than that. Do you still think it's the case that the technology is still accelerating? Has it calmed down post-COVID? Simply speaking, are we all living in a digital world, really, whatever business you're in?
I think absolutely we are living in a digital world, whatever business you're in. But I don't think that the leaps in the technology are going to stop. I mean, there are some technologies which businesses have been sort of tinkering with for a while, but actually still really yet to unlock their full potential. Blockchain, the Internet of Things, all technologies which could be transformational with businesses. But you know, businesses are still looking for the right use cases, and once those start getting found, I think that will be the next frontier of technology.
Fantastic. Well, guys, last question really, just as a sort of wrap up, just looking at the report and commending it to our viewers and readers, is there anything else that leapt out at you that was an odd result, an interesting result, something you'd like to look into perhaps further? Chloe, first.
I think for me, I was really fascinated by the chapter on data monetization. To me, particularly with a focus on sectors like consumer goods, retail, the opportunities of data monetization are significant, but there is a nervousness around customer sentiment, around risking that trust, and also just working out what to do with the data. And I feel that the section of the report that highlights that and the ways in which, you know, businesses need to get their head around that and navigate that fine line between reputation but opportunity those are the businesses that are really going to succeed going forward.
Set against particularly for us in Europe, the background of the digital decade, whether it's Data Act or whatever it may be, the rights and wrongs of use of data. It's going to be fascinating to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I agree.
Paul, from your perspective?
Every conversation that we have in this space has to come to AI and artificial intelligence. And obviously there's a lot of enthusiasm for that. But one of the things that is borne out by the report is that we're still trying to work out what those use cases are that are really going to deliver value, particularly when we're talking about generative AI. Because there is a hell of a lot of value that's already been created through AI that's not generative AI, but how do we make generative AI really deliver value for an organization? And part of the exploration there is going to involve a consideration of the regulation that's now coming through, right? And so this tension between business opportunity and regulation and that real opportunity in AI and how that all plays out is going to be really, really fascinating. But everybody does recognize that with that regulation, it gives you a higher degree of certainty so that you can be more confident in making the moves that you're making. But at the same time, it is going to have some constraint around what you can do. And that's the challenge that I think businesses now face. Where's the value that they can create through the use cases? And how are we going to do that in a way that is compliant with the regulation that's coming through? And that challenge is really more problematic perhaps than it was 20 years ago, because the regulation that's coming through now is not holistic, and it's not uniform across the piece. We've got lots and lots of different things happening in lots and lots of different jurisdictions. So if you're a global business, getting your head around that means that you have to really put in place some fantastic governance in your organization. And through that governance, you should be able to crack those difficult nuts.
Brilliant. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Chloe. Thank you for that. You've really brought it to life. And to our viewers, please do dive in and see what the report says to you, whether you're looking from a particular type of technology or a particular region. It's clear that the opportunities are out there, the ways in which to navigate and to ride the wave, which is our subtext for the Tech Index this year, is out there. So thank you, guys. We commend this to you and hope you enjoy reading the report. Thanks very much.